Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. In this video we are going to learn how to write the letter Alef in 4 different positions. Remember that in Persian, the letters of a word are usually attached to each other. So far, we have learned how to read the letters of the alphabet. And the letters of the alphabet are written in their separate or normal form. Okay, so now we should also learn how these letters look like when they are part of a word. Each letter in Persian can be written in 4 different forms, depending on their position in a word or whether or not they are part of a word. So we have 4 different forms for each letter. The first one is when the letters come in their separate form or normal form, or how you see them in the alphabet. Second, when a letter comes at the beginning of a word. So when that letter is the first letter of a word. Third, when a letter comes at the middle of a word. And last, when a letter comes at the end of a word. So when that letter is the last letter of a word. Now let's see how we should write Alef in its separate form. Alef in its separate form is simply a straight vertical line, like that, just like how you learned in the alphabet, okay? And you know that we can add A, E, O, and A to make the vowels. And also, for making the sounds U, we need to add the letter V to Alef, and for making the vowel E, we need to add the letter Y. So this was just a reminder. If you think you need to revise more on that, you can go back to the first video where I explained the alphabet and the vowels. Okay, so let me just erase that. Now, so how should we write Alef on a paper when it comes in its separate form or normal form? Well, simply, as I said, a vertical line. So let's say we have the ground line, and you start from top and you draw the Alef downwards. And try not to cut the ground line for the sake of a good and nice handwriting. And then you can add the signs A, E, O, and A. Now let's see how we should write Alef when it is at the beginning of a word. The good news is that Alef in the beginning of a word has the same shape as it has in its normal or separate form. Why is that? Well, because let's say we have Alef and it is at the beginning of a word, whatever that word is, okay? And you know that we write from right side to left side, right? So when Alef is at the beginning of a word, there is no letter in its right side, okay? Alef is the starting letter. But what about the letter that comes after it in its left side? Well, the rule is that Alef never likes to be attached to the letter that comes after it, okay? Alef can only be attached to the letter that comes before it. Well, in this case, there is no letter before it, so that's why Alef in its beginning form, when it is at the beginning of a word, has also the same shape as it has in its separate form. Let me give you some examples. Let's say we have the word ashk, the word for tear. Okay, you see here that Alef is at the beginning of the word ashk, and the letter that came after it is the letter she, but they cannot be attached to each other. Okay, sh doesn't have a problem to be attached to the letter that came before it, but the problem is Alef. Alef doesn't want that. Let me give you another example. Let's say we have the word استخر. استخر, the word for swimming pool. Okay, here we have the letter Alef at the beginning. The next letter is Se, and they cannot be attached to each other because Alef doesn't want to be attached to the letter that came after it. Another example, Omid, which is the word for hope. Here again, we have Alef at the beginning, which gives the sound O here, and the next letter is Me or Mim. And as you can see, again, for the same reasons, Me cannot be attached to Alef, or Alef cannot be attached to Me. The last example, Aseman, the word for sky. Again, we have Alef at the beginning, the next letter is Se or Sin, and Alef cannot be attached to Se, even though they are a part of the same word. Now let's see how Alef is written in the middle of a word. As I mentioned before, Alef cannot be attached to the letter after it, but it can be attached to the letter before it, unless that letter doesn't want to. So Alef in the middle can have two shapes. A simple vertical line, just like you write it in the separate form, or a vertical line with a small horizontal line in its right side. This small horizontal line, or leg, or whatever you want to call it, is just an indicator to show you, hey, you can attach Alef to the letter that comes in its right side, so before Alef, unless, again, that letter in its right side doesn't want to. Let me give you some examples. Let's say we have the word baz, the word for open. You can see here that Alef is attached to the letter B. So B is not in its complete form or normal form or separate form, okay? But you will learn it later in the next video probably. But when Alef is attached to the letter in its right side, we don't write it in its usual way. We don't go from top downwards. Rather, we complete the letter in its right side, okay? And then without lifting our pen, we go up, okay? And then we put the dot for that letter. Again, we do this without lifting our pen, and then we put the dot for B. So don't do this, B, and then Alef. First of all, it's usually not good for your handwriting, and also it will probably slow you down a bit. Ba, ba. Or let's say we have the letter Se and Alef to make the word Sa. Se and Alef, Sa. We don't do this, okay? Rather, we don't lift our pen, and we go from down upwards. So again, the rule is whenever you have Alef attached to another letter, which is in its right side always, you write Alef from down upwards. Sa, Ja, Ka, Pa. Okay? So again, we write Ba, and then we write Ze. So why is Ze not attached to Alef? Yes, because it came after Alef, and Alef never likes to be attached to the letter that comes after it, so in its left side. Okay, that's why Alef is attached to B, but not to the Z. But together they are part of one word. Baz. Also, this is very important for you to know that almost all the time, whenever you see the letter Alef that is in the middle of a word, it always gives the sound ah, just like in the word baz. Okay, that's why Alef in the middle of a word never has the signs of a or e or o or a. So we don't write baz like that. That's a mistake. Okay. So Alef in the middle of a word always gives the sound a. There might be very few exceptions to this rule, but you don't need to worry about them right now. Let me give you another example. The word baran, which is the word for rain. You can see here that we have two Alef. And I chose this example on purpose to show you something. Now the first Alef, as you can see, is attached to the letter B that precedes it. But the second Alef here, the second Alef is written simply in its normal form or in its separate form. It is not attached to any letter. Why is that? Yes, exactly. Because Alef in the first part can be attached to B, but in the second part, Alef wants to be attached to the letter Re, but Re is one of those letters that doesn't like to be attached to the letter that comes after it. That is why we write Alef in its separate form, because Re doesn't want to. And the letter Ne, which is at the end of the word baran, is not attached to Alef. Why? Yes, because Alef doesn't like to be attached to the letter that comes after it. Okay, so how do we write it? You see that the first Alef is attached, so that's why we go from down upwards without lifting our pen. Okay, so ba, re, and then the second Alef is not attached to anything, to any letter. That's why we write it in its usual form, and we go from top downwards, like that. And then we add the letter Ne. Again, ba, ran, ba, ran. Now let's see how we should write Alef at the end of a word. The rules for Alef at the end of a word are just like the rules for Alef in the middle of a word. So when Alef comes at the end, that means that there is no letter after it, right? So we don't have to be worried about that. And Alef can be attached to the letter that precedes it in its right side, unless that letter doesn't want to, or it's not attachable to the letter that comes after it. So let me give you some examples. Let's say we have the word ba, which is the word for with, okay? So here, Alef is at the end of the word ba and is attached to the letter B. Also, keep in mind, just like when you have Alef in the middle of a word, Alef at the end of a word always gives the sound a. So we never have a, e, o, and a when Alef is at the end of a word or at the middle of a word, because it always gives the sound a. Now let me give you another example. Let's say we have the word geda. Geda, the word for a beggar, someone who's really poor and asks for money, usually on the streets. You can see here that Alef is at the end of the word geda and is not attached to the letter D. Why is that? Can you guess? Yes, exactly. The letter D doesn't like to be attached to the letter Alef or to any letter that comes after it. That's why, although Alef likes to be attached to the letter that precedes it in its right side, but if that letter doesn't want to, so here the letter D or Dal doesn't want to be attached to the letter that comes after it, then we cannot connect them to each other. So that's why in the word Geda, Alef is at the end, but it is written in its separate form. So just like Alef, in the middle of the word, Alef at the end can have two shapes. One is the simple vertical line, as you see in its separate form, and one that is attached to the letter that precedes it in its right side. To summarize, here we have Alef in 4 positions. So Alef in its separate form is written just like you write Alef in the alphabet, a simple straight vertical line. Alef in the beginning is the same, a simple vertical line. But Alef in the middle can have 2 shapes, a vertical line and also a vertical line with a leg, or whatever you want to call that, in its right side to indicate that Alef can be attached to the letter in its right side that precedes it, unless that letter doesn't want to. And same goes for Alef at the end of a word. So it can be in its separate form and also be attached to another letter. Well done. That was it for this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you had any questions, comment down below and I will either answer in the comments or make another video explaining the answers. If you find the content of this channel useful, subscribe to the channel and share it with the people you think would find it useful as well. Don't forget to practice. Until another video, have a good time and take care.